All right, guys, thanks for joining us today. We've got a special guest who's flown out from the United States just to see us. Well, he's seeing other people as well, but he came specifically for us to inform us of what's going on in the global economy, and that's Jim Rickards. Welcome, Jim.
Great to be with you, Philip.
Fantastic. Now, Jim, you've got a new book that's come out recently.
Right.
Now, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but I look at it and it's, I've got to be honest, it's a little bit scary. It's got a meteorite hitting a pile of cash,
Right.
and it's called Aftermath. Now, Aftermath suggests that something bad's happened and we're living in the post-reality of that. What's the book about? Is it about meteorites or something else?
Well, the meteorites are a clue. It's Aftermath is volume 4 of a 4-volume international monetary quartet. So the first book was Currency Wars, came out in 2011. Then The Death of Money came out in 2014. Then The Road to Ruin came out in 2016. You can see I have these nice cheery titles. And then Aftermath comes out in 2019. The Aftermath title has kind of a double entendre. Yes, it's the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. We're still living through it. The issues are not resolved. We'll have more crises sooner than later because it was sort of handed off to the central banks, but the central banks have not been able to get their balance sheets back to normal. They've not been able to get interest rates back to normal. So they're completely unprepared for the next crisis. And then looking forward to the next crisis, what will the aftermath of that crisis be? And my suggestion is, with a lot of evidence, I think, to support it, is that will be a different world. And a lot of people, when you're in my position, you're an author, speaker, you're, out giving, doing consultations or presentations or whatever. People want to put words in your mouth. They say, well, Jim Rickards says this or Jim Rickards says that, most of which I never said. People say, well, he predicts the end of the world, sell everything and buy gold. I've never said that. I don't think it's the end of the world. You should have some gold, but not too much. But that doesn't mean we won't have a severe financial crisis that will change not just the economy, but the way people live and the way they interact. And so I'm talking about the aftermath of the last crisis and the aftermath of the next crisis, and kind of explaining why there will be a crisis, why there are cracks in the foundation. And that's really what the book's about. The specific issues, policy issues, facts, developments that will lead to a new crisis.
And with this new crisis that you see coming, what do you think are going to be the triggers, or is it all in motion? Like, is there anything that can be done? What do you see there?
Well, there's a lot that can be done, but nothing that anyone wants to do. In fact, you could have gone back even further and avoided the 2008 crisis. This is the next one would be really the third in a sequence. The first one is 1998. That was started in 1997 with the Asian financial crisis. Sort of calmed down in the winter, spread around the world. Blew up with Russia in the summer of 1998, and then came home to roost at long-term capital management. That was the hedge fund in the United States that it nearly failed, but if it had failed completely, it would have taken Wall Street down with it. Lehman Brothers would have failed in 1998, forget 2008, would have happened 10 years sooner. But instead, the major investment banks, the 14 largest investment banks, got together. They pulled $4 billion of cash, put it into long-term capital, in effect propped up the balance sheet. They became the owners of the positions, of course, and then took about a year or slightly more to unwind it gradually, as opposed to doing that in the panic. But the world came within hours of completely shutting down. I was the counsel of long-term capital management, and I negotiated the bailout. I was in the room, on the front row seat, on the phone with whether it was the treasury officials or the CEOs of the major banks and so forth. And we did get it done and brought it in for a soft landing in that sense. But it was a close run thing, as they say, and if it had not got done, the Tokyo Stock Exchange wouldn't have opened that day, and one by one, exchanges around the world sequentially would have shut down, at least for a while, and it would have been a lot worse than what happened in 2008. Well, obviously in a situation like that, there are lessons that could be learned. One is don't use excessive leverage. When I say don't, I'm not just talking about long-term capital. Long-term capital was an example of what I'm talking about, but it can apply to the system as a whole. Don't use too much leverage, don't use derivatives, too much opacity, not enough information, bad risk management models, value at risk. A lot of the hypotheses behind modern financial theory are demonstrably false. It's not just an opinion, you can show it empirically that they're false. And you should have learned all those things. And one of the results would be don't repeal Glass-Steagall, don't allow any more mega bank mergers, maybe break up the biggest banks at the time banned almost all derivatives. The exchange-traded derivatives that have a commercial use tend to be a lot safer. Perhaps those could continue, but most of the derivatives market is just a way for banks to steal money from customers and serve no purpose other than kind of gambling.
Yeah. Well, didn't they recently just change? The Paul Volcker rule to allow?
It's kind of right. Getting ahead. In 2008, this happened again. They did pass some legislation, but even that's being watered down. So Wall Street, through its ownership of Washington, seems to be completely incapable of dealing with the causes of this crisis. So in 1998, in effect, Wall Street got together and bailed out a hedge fund. Come forward 10 years, in the following years, what happened? They repealed Glass-Steagall, which was our legislation separating commercial banking from investment banking. For about 65 years, it had been the case that you could take deposits and make loans, or you could underwrite and sell securities, but you couldn't do both. Well, once they repealed it, you were allowed to do both. This turned our biggest banks into hedge funds, in effect. They also repealed some legislation that allowed derivatives on just about everything. Prior to that, you could only have derivatives on certain instruments. After that, after 1999, this was, you could have derivatives on anything. Of course, that led straight to Enron and a few other fiascos. But by 2008, 10 years on, it was kind of a replay of what had happened in the 1920s. So now we were set up for an even bigger crisis. This time, it wasn't a question of Wall Street bailing out a hedge fund. It was a question of the central banks bailing out Wall Street. In 2008, everything would have collapsed. Bear Stearns did collapse, Lehman Brothers did collapse. Our two biggest mortgage agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, collapsed. And Morgan Stanley was days away in mid-September, and then Goldman, Citi, all the rest would have fallen too. But through central bank intervention, what did they do? They guaranteed every bank deposit in America. There was no requirement to do so, but they did. They guaranteed every money market fund in America. Again, no requirement to do so, but they did. $10 trillion of currency swaps with the European Central Bank, because the European banks needed dollars, couldn't get them because the ECB prints euros, not dollars. So they did a swap, massive swap with the Fed, and the ECB got the dollars and then parceled them out to their banks. And that prevented the sequential collapse, the cascade of bank failures, but it also truncated the cleanup, if you will, bad assets and bad banking. It would have been much better to allow most of those banks to fail. I would say that the government could have come in, nationalized them, stripped out the bad assets, put it in trust for the American people, and then given the bondholders a haircut, wiped out equity, have recapitalized banks, and then just IPO them as clean banks. And the losses would have been massive, but they would have fallen where they deserved to fall, on the stockholders. But that wasn't done. Instead, we ripped off American savers for about $4 trillion through zero interest rates to prop up Jamie Dimon's bonus. Here we are 10 years on. So the point is, are there things you can do? Yes. Are they being done? No. Are they going to be done? No. So what does that mean? Well, we're just, probably not a very long period of time away from the next crisis, with one difference, which is now that the debt is at the central bank level. Again, 1998 took it from hedge fund to the banks. 2008 took it from the banks to the central banks. Who's going to bail out the central banks? And that's really the problem. Your only alternatives are turn to the IMF to basically bail out the world, although that's a slow and difficult and kind of fraught process, or shut the banks. And that's what I expect. They'll close exchanges, close banks, close ATMs, freeze accounts. They'll say, we're not taking your money, but we're just going to have a bank holiday, an extended bank holiday, if you will.
It's not a fun holiday either, is it?
No, it's not. And I say things like that, and people say, oh, that would never happen. I say, well, talk to people in Cyprus, Greece, Argentina. It's happened many times. In 1933, every bank in the United States was closed by executive order of President Roosevelt. He just said the banks were closed. When he gave that order, he didn't say when they would reopen. People just had to sort of bear with it. Now it turns out they did reopen about 8 days later, but no one knew that at the time. It could have been 8 days, could have been a month, 2 months. In 1914, the outbreak of World War I, the New York Stock Exchange was closed for 5 months, from July 1914 to December 1914. So every one of these things has happened before. Some of them have happened very recently. They happen because there's nothing else you can do when you don't have a source of liquidity. I mean, if you say, well, why can't we just turn to the Fed again? Well, the Fed took their balance sheet in 2008, beginning of 2008, They took their balance sheet from $800 billion to over $4.2 trillion. They've only come back a little bit. They're still in the high threes, 3.8, 3.9 trillion. What are they going to do if a crisis hit tomorrow? Go to 5 trillion, 6 trillion? And at what point do you pass an invisible confidence limit where you've destroyed confidence in the dollar itself?